Welcome to one of my favorite all-time lessons ever in math. And it's such a shame that it has to come at this point of the year because I just love talking about Pythagorean and his theorem. So, Pythagoras has a theorem, and that theorem says, well, we're going to learn what it says. So today, lesson 14.3, page 640 and 641, you already have an idea of what Pythagoras and his theorem says because you've read those pages. So we're going to use the theorem to find the side lengths of right triangles in today's lesson. Our essential question, how are the lengths of the sides of a right triangle related? So we're going to be able to answer that question real quickly here because you took some notes. And those notes need to include all the things that came from the page that look just like this. But let's talk about a few things because this vocabulary is essential. Once you have the vocabulary down, the math part is straightforward. I have no doubts that you were very confident in doing the math part. However, the only way you can do the math part correctly is to understand the vocabulary of right triangles. So the first thing that we need to understand, it is a right triangle, so there is a right angle somewhere. Right here, there is a right angle. Well, the two sides that form that right angle are called legs. Those are the legs. They form the right angle. Okay? Their legs typically called A and B. They could be called anything. Who cares if they're A or B or not? Just know that the legs form the right angle. And then, of course, we have the hypotenuse. That is the green one in our picture. The hypotenuse is the side opposite the right angle. It is also the longest side. When it comes to the three side lengths, it is the longest side of the triangle. Okay? You cannot have a leg longer than the hypotenuse. And so now that we know the vocabulary of the right angle, we can say Pythagorean's theorem, which says the sum of the squares of the legs is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. So right here, that's taking the sum of the squares of the legs, that's A and B, we're squaring them and we're adding it together, is equal to the square of the hypotenuse, c squared. So now we have an equation where we're going to be given some information and we plug it into that equation and voila, we solve and get our answer. So let's do a couple. The first one, find the length of the hypotenuse. In fact, that's all we're going to do with the rest of this video is find the length of the hypotenuse. So here we have a right triangle and we know a squared plus b squared equals c squared. You should always write that down. Excuse me. Now we understand that typically in labeling, the legs are A and B, the hypotenuse is C. So it doesn't matter. 6 could be A, 6 could be B, doesn't matter. I'm just going to put them in there. 6 squared plus 8 squared is equal to the hypotenuse C squared. Now we just do the math. 6 squared is 36, 8 squared is 64, that's equal to C squared. Add the two together, 100 is equal to C squared. Now if I want to find the answer to C, the length of that hypotenuse, I do the square root, which is the inverse of squaring, and I find that 10 is equal to C. So C is 10 centimeters for that hypotenuse. Moving right along, we have another right triangle. We remind ourselves that in a right triangle, Pythagorean's theorem says a squared plus b squared, the sum of the squares of the legs is equal to c squared, the hypotenuse squared. So we have to find the two sides that form the right angle. Those are A and B. Doesn't matter what order we put them in. 5 squared plus 12 squared is equal to c squared. That's 25 plus 144. That's 169 is equal to c squared. And again, when I take the square root, I get 13 is equal to c. So right here, 13 inches for the hypotenuse. Moving on to our last example of the first video. Once again, we have a right triangle. Pythagorean's theorem says if you have a right triangle, then you absolutely have the sum of the squares of the legs a squared plus b squared is equal to the square of the hypotenuse at c squared. And then again, we find the sides that form the right angle. Those are the legs. So 15 squared plus 8 squared is equal to c squared. 15 squared is 225. You can use a calculator, you can have it memorized, or you can certainly use your reference sheet. 8 squared is 64. And then when you add those two together, 289 is equal to c squared. Taking the square root to find the distance of the hypotenuse, the square root of 289 is 17. So the hypotenuse is 17 feet. Now those were pretty straightforward because we didn't use any decimals or any other kind of stuff. We all had ones that worked out real nicely. Shouldn't make a difference if it doesn't. If it doesn't work out perfectly and nicely, it's okay. You could end up with a decimal answer. We will talk about that in class, and we will talk about it as we move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, your first quick write of the night is to find the length of this hypotenuse given this right triangle. Please draw it in your quick write section of your notes, label, and this is where you're going to find you are now going to have decimals. No difference. You still square them using your calculator, and then you take the square root. You set it up, you solve it. Take a break, get a drink, get a snack, come back for video number 2.